Hey everyone, Mike Shea here, along with Ryan Mendoza. We are the co-creators of Miskatonic High. We are here to do the commentary for issue number 18, if you can believe it. How you doing, Ryan?
Doing great.
Hey.
Happy Father's Day.
Happy Father's Day to you too. Well, we are the Danger Dads. So.
Yep,
Yep.
indeed we are.
All right, so issue 18 was one that had been coming for a little while. We had been sort of dropping hints about a number of things. We had been dropping hints about Trish. We've been dropping hints that a certain reanimator was going to make an appearance sooner or later. And so it sort of all came together. We've been dropping hints that, somebody's been stealing some bodies from the local cemeteries. So it was time to sort of bring it all together. Let's start off as we typically do, talking about the cover because I think this is another great one. Um, A, I love your cemetery scenes. So like every panel that's set in the cemetery in this is great. Like I love the way that you sort of envision this cemetery. It's like a full cemetery with lots of statues and things like that. And so it's a very cool um setting for that we haven't seen a whole lot in the comic
Yeah,
so far. But then also the color choices, like the really sort of cool purples that you use that sort of mix with, Anton's light blue. I just think is just like a really nice color palette. And then, the white snow mixed in. So it works a lot. So anyway, why don't you talk about this cover, how you sort of came up with the idea and sort of put it together?
yeah. Like usual, I make for concept art for you to look at, and we kind of agreed with this one because it was kind of a classic
Mhm.
throwback to the old what do you call those? Those um, horror comics from
The EC comics?
the 50s. Yeah, the Easy
Yeah.
Comics.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah.
Remember the ones with the circles in the side, and I
Mhm.
think we were supposed to do that as a variant cover or something,
Oh, were we?
but we
Okay.
kind of forgot.
We'll save that because I mean it's not like this is going to be the only reanimation one that we're doing.
Correct, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I was. This one was came in kind of late, so
Mhm.
I was thinking of another concept for the cover, and I was thinking of putting a zombie kind of creature in it,
Mhm.
and I thought, wouldn't it be cooler if it was just a hand popping up from the ground?
Mhm.
Just, just kind of recalls those old black and white horror movies
Mhm.
that was really creepy. And of course, like you said, the cemetery really added to the whole atmosphere of the book, not just
Mhm.
the cover.
Mhm.
And yeah, you're right. The purple tones in the sky kind of makes the characters pop a bit more,
Right.
especially Anton because he glows kind of blue.
Mhm.
And if we made dark blue, just as usually we find in the night sky, he would have been lost in it.
Right.
And like I said, the snow also pops in the background, and it doesn't get lost in the whole sky.
Right.
So I think it worked out well, and
Mhm.
I love the whole classic cemetery look with all the statues and the old graveyards and yeah, I think it really came out well.
Yeah, I really like this one. One of the things that I like about your art and coloring is, we do a lot of night scenes in the comic, but nothing like ever really feels like it gets lost, like in the really dark. It's like every, it's pretty clear what happens with our action and what happens in the comic at night times because you do use these cool colors rather than just make everything pitch black. So, like using this dark purple to signify night or using, something dark but not oppressively black really makes it so like nothing's obscured. It's not hard to read. It's easy to follow along.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And yeah, and since this uh, comics is very unique in a way that you could actually use different kind of coloring to make a scene. Like in some comic books, they would just make the whole page green or yellow and red, and it would still work.
Hmm.
Um, and in a way, it's also done in movies,
Hmm.
wherein you see movies that are tinted
Yeah.
yellow,
Hmm.
yellowish, or green or blue,
Hmm.
and it kind of gives the comic, the book, its own personality.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be dark and horror oriented, but it's also kind of poppy in a way.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
mean,
Yeah.
it's the whole duality of the comic that we keep on talking about.
Hmm.
You know, it has this it has scenes where it's really dark and gory, and then
Hmm.
it's on the other side. The colors are also very it can be bright in some
Hmm.
areas without being too gaudy, is what I
Right.
mean.
Right. It's the nice thing about our comic, which is it's horror. There's some really there's scary things. There's some things that are full of dread, but also, there's a lot of humor and there's a lot of warmth and there's a lot of just personality to the comic, which so it's like you said, it's that duality which I think comes through with the color choices that you make.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So it's one last thing on the cover, and then I'll move on. But it's I have heard from a number of readers who are always like, "Why is Anton scared of things? He's a ghost. None of these things can really hurt him. So it really must be really scary if Anton is scared." And my thing is, Anton talks a good game, but he's probably like Scooby, where he's like really scared of almost everything.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And we have to remember that there was this issue wherein, even as a ghost,
Yeah.
he saw this creature who
Hmm.
was able to devour other ghosts.
Right.
So he knows that he's not safe at all,
Right.
and that with everything that has happened in Miskatonic, it, things can still go
Right,
pretty bad with him.
right, that the hound was able to get its jaws around him too, so, yeah,
Yeah,
Anton's not
and
really
it,
safe.
yeah, and also he suffered this fate at a very young age,
Mhm,
and I think even though he's a ghost, he doesn't really understand it or comprehend it fully.
right,
And he still has very human emotions.
yeah,
And fear is one of the most primal emotions that humans have. And
mhm.
I mean, you see
Mhm.
a ghastly hand, and I'm pretty sure that you get scared of it, whether you're a ghost or a vampire.
Right, right, I mean, he can still be surprised, I mean, it's
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And also, he might be scared for Trish or something.
right, exactly. Okay, so, we have Ren do the previously. So the sort of the thought had been, there's a number of characters because we're doing the season we're doing, and all the characters are sort of split up. There's some characters who don't really appear in every issue. So having one of them do the previously was a nice way to get them into the issue, even though they're not in the actual story. So she basically tells everybody, what has been happening up to this point. And if you don't know, you can go read it. Um, and then we sort of jump into our story. And we had been talking about Trish since about issue 4, I think, developing her character and knowing that there's a dark side to her that's sort of been hidden for a long time. And one of the really nice things was we finally got to be able to see it. And so one of the things that we talked about and what I wanted to do in the script was really put you in her point of view so that we could finally just see how messed up she was. Um, and so we start this by sort of having her recap how she got where she is, with her father being arrested for killing her mother, having to go live with Simon's mother and with Simon, that really, all of her friends are on their phones all the time and things like that. And she's sort of in a very different place, a very dark place. Um, and in a
Very.
way, she's trying to maintain her relationship with her dead mother through ballet dance. It was something that they did together. It was something that was very important to them. And so what we find is that she's continuing to ballet dance, but not just at home or at the studio or anywhere like that. She's actually goes to the graveyard where her mother is buried and dances ballet dance on top of her grave. Um, Basically everybody that I've shown this comic to pretty much just goes, "Wow," at that second page. Um,
Mhm.
it's a page that I love. It really came from what you had done in issue 2, being able to see into the underground with the rats, and just always thought, wouldn't it be cool to sort of do the same thing with Trish dancing above and seeing, the skeletons below. So, um, I didn't I certainly didn't tell you how to draw this page, so I'm kinda curious, like, how you approach this page when you saw what I was asking you to do.
Well, in a way, you really did tell me how to do the page, but not that. But I guess not exactly the way you had it in your mind when you were writing it. But I think it all worked well because of the setup of the page.
Mhm,
I mean, the first few pages was really well written, and the setup was really well done.
mhm.
I mean, it's pretty disturbing once you realize what's happening,
Right.
and you kind of get into the mind of Trish
Mhm.
very early on, and you think to yourself that wow, this girl must be going through a lot, and
Right.
the first two pages really strikes you as um, this is going to be a wild ride. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that second page is pretty powerful,
Mhm.
even in its written script form. When I read it, I was like, "Whoa,
Mhm.
how am I gonna pull this off?"
That's often what I think, but I'm glad that's your problem rather than my problem to deal with.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And even though I had ideas in my head, I didn't really know how to execute it at first, but
Mhm,
that's how it goes. When I read the script and when I
mhm,
break it down, I kind of have it clearer in my head little
mhm,
by little.
mhm,
And when you start laying it out, it becomes clearer, like I said, and it's like a sculpture. You
mhm,
start with a block of uh, of material, and then you
mhm.
just chip away at it, and then eventually you come up with this.
Right.
And in some cases, it works out well, and I think this is one of them.
I do too. Well, and something is so this again, going back to I think issue 5. So I think I sent you the script in to issue 5 and the first draft, and it wasn't particularly good. And came back and you were talking to me and you were talking about how, this is a comic book. It needs to have strong visual interest. It's one thing just to be in the mind of Trish and say, okay, this is weird. But also you have to find a cool, interesting visual metaphor to show it. Don't just say it, show it. And so one of the things that I think about when I write the script for you is, okay, how to make sure that something visually interesting is always going on. So it's not just people talking because that gets really boring. And so, when sort of had this idea that she was dancing on the grave, thought, okay, that sounds like something visually interesting, and then let's take it a step further to make it more visually interesting, and then throw that at Ryan and let him figure out how to do it.
Yeah, well, in comic books, if you see a interesting piece of art,
Mhm.
readers tend to gravitate towards the dialogue
It's
more.
true.
They yeah yeah because hey, what's going on here? I have to know more. So instinctively they go to the text, and then they follow it. They want to know more.
Right.
So that's the thing. You have to grab the attention of the readers with the visuals first,
Hmm.
and then you follow it up with the exposition of the words.
Right.
And in that way, it works together.
Right.
And that's the unique thing about comic books, I think.
Hmm.
And it's why I love working on this medium.
Hmm. And I think it's something that's really hard for new comic book writers to do because I see it a lot in comics, both in mainstream and indie comics, is writers don't always have that sense about, making something visual. So you get page on after page after page after page of just dialogue back and forth, and it gets really, really tiresome, and you don't know why. You're like,
Mm-hmm.
there's something not right here, but you can't put your finger on it. And then you realize I haven't seen anything interesting in probably a good 5 or 6 pages. And,
Mm-hmm.
it once you become attuned to it, you start to realize, "Oh, it's a visual medium, but it's also a collaborative medium." It's like the writer is supposed to do their part, but you gotta give the artist the chance to do their part too to make it a stronger thing.
Correct.
Yeah.
And also, writers and artists,
Mhm.
I think I consider them both artists
No,
anyway.
of course. Mhm.
We tend to be overindulgent
Mhm.
sometimes,
Mhm.
and it takes a fresh eyes to look at material with a new perspective.
Mhm.
And like I said, sometimes we overdo things,
Sure.
and we need someone to tell us to knock it back down. And I mean,
Yeah.
I'm been guilty of that as well.
Sure.
I kick myself for drawing things like this one, and then when it comes to coloring, why did you have to make it so detailed?
Yeah.
I mean, it would be okay if I had a separate colorist, and then he'd be cursing me instead.
Right. Well, yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Okay.
the way it goes, I think.
I think it is. But the nice thing is, again, very quickly, both the art and the dialogue tells us that Trish is a very messed up girl and has never ever recovered from the death of her mother, which we saw, back in issue 12. So, we talk about it a lot, but it's like if somebody just picked up this issue, they could find out very quickly that Trish is messed up. If someone picked
Mhm.
up this issue who's been following us for a while, they would have seen Trish from the very beginning. They would have seen her relationship with Simon. They would have found out about her father and her mother. And this would be, oh, I see all the steps that you took to put this together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so Trish and Anton are staking out the graveyard because, as we found out, someone is robbing graves of corpses. Um, there were two new bodies buried here, the two brothers who were killed last issue. And so they figure whoever is, claiming these bodies will want fresh meat, and so they're gonna wait here and see who turns up. Meanwhile, Trish and Anton are having their conversation, basically talking about how Anton was, killed um, back in Egypt, was stabbed with the blade of Cronus and became a ghost. So he really doesn't have a grave of his own, because nobody remembers him.
Hmm.
Trish, meanwhile, is wondering because Anton can see ghosts, does he ever see her mother? And he says, yes, I see her, but I see her at at Simon's house because that's where she died. Um, so Trish tells us a bit more about after her mother's death. That the library, the Miskatonic University Library, came and collected all of her research materials very quickly and moved them out. But she found some hidden research that her mother had been doing into magic, into eldritch magic, and she started practicing, doing her own, learning some more, and realized that she needed to get to Miskatonic University library, where Kerwin has been sort of hoarding all the magic tomes, and used the Josh Farragut, who used to be the president before Simon, to get access to it. So, sort of putting those pieces together um, to explain sort of some of the things that have been happening in the past. Then we get um, the grave robbers. They show up, and we are introduced to Herbert West, Dr. Herbert West. And I'm kind of curious because he is a very famous figure in Lovecraftian lore. Been sort of had a number of different incarnations over the years, including, the 80s horror movie, Reanimator. And so
Mhm.
I'm kind of curious, like how you approached him, to make him your own.
Well, I really didn't have any choice but to have to design him the way I view him in my mind
Hmm.
based on just the descriptions.
Hmm.
I mean, it's very easy for me to draw inspiration from the movie or from other illustrations, but I
Hmm.
thought it was best to just come up with my own rendition of him.
Hmm.
And in that way, kind of makes him more unique
Hmm.
in that when people read the book, they don't go, "Hey, I know this guy. I
Right.
mean, I've seen him before."
Right.
So they look at the book and then they say, "Hey, who is this? Is it possible it's him?"
Hmm.
So there's still a bit of mystery as to who this person is.
Hmm.
And at the same time, I wanted him to fit into the setting of the book, so a bit more contemporary, a bit more
Hmm.
modern,
Hmm.
but at the same time, he's also a bit old-fashioned. I mean,
Hmm.
he still has analog watches,
Hmm.
still relies on it's a digital recorder, but he doesn't really use the phone,
Right. Like everybody
which
else would.
most
Yeah.
people do. I mean, he still has a dedicated recorder.
Hmm.
He still uses a very old-fashioned lamp.
Hmm.
Notice
Yeah, I did notice that. I
still
was like, yeah.
he still relies on pens and a flashlight, just like a doctor would.
Right.
And
Right.
then yeah. So I wanted him to look like he would in this world. Is what
Hmm.
I'm pointing at.
Right. The thing that I noticed about him in the way that you drew him was he's kind of very tall and very uh, like stiff. Like he's very exacting. Like,
Mhm.
he expects things a certain way and is very disappointed in almost everyone that they don't do it perfectly. Um, which I think is a great way to think of his character. You know, when I think of the Lovecraft story, I always think of the interesting relationship between him and the narrator of that story who is always helping him out. And you're always wondering, why is the narrator helping him out? Because he clearly is sort of off doing his own thing,
Mhm.
is really set in his own mindset. And so, thinking about that and then coming to this, it's like, okay, I can see there's like he's very exacting. He's like, precise. That there's a magnetism to that sort of thing that you want to see what he's able to accomplish. So
Yeah,
I really like the way that you designed him like that to make him sort of stand apart from sort of the modern teenagers who are kind of, much more casual and much more,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, usually with geniuses like Herbert West, I mean,
Mhm.
he does extraordinary things, and usually people like this are a bit awkward
Mhm.
socially,
Mhm.
and most people misunderstand them because they think very differently
Mhm.
about things. And like you said, he's very calculating,
Mhm.
and it's because it's his mindset that things has to go perfectly or else bad things will happen, and we will see that in the next few pages.
That's true. That is very true. Yeah, and when they go badly, he still maintains that preciseness and, that cerebral mentality about it that yeah. Anyway, we'll get to it, and I think you're exactly right on that. Um, okay, so they dig up the bodies. Anton and Trish follow them back to the Tillinghast Science Center at Miskatonic University, and then see him basically start his experiment. Um, experiment number 47. And so he is basically recounting it to his digital recorder, um, telling us about Sean and RJ McCormick, both died, doing it in a very sort of medical scientific method as he basically cuts apart both bodies and puts them together so that there's sort of one perfect perfectly healthy body, that he can then reanimate. Anton finds this excessively gross, whereas Trish thinks it's better than AP Bio. Like she's all into this. Um, so then West goes ahead and starts the reanimation process. Trish and Anton are in the closet, sort of watching this and accidentally clunking things over. Um, but West is too much into the experiment to see anything about it. Um, and as we know, as we read, the reanimation process works. The McCormick combination brother comes back to life, but there's a real lacking of cognitive abilities. Okay, so threw at you the idea of combining the two brothers into a single person and then reanimating them as sort of a mindless being. How'd you come up with the design for that? Like, how do you design? Okay, you can see it in the hair, that like which one it comes from which, but like, how do you approach that?
Not very easily. I mean, it would be easier if I just put the head of
Mhm.
one of the brothers to the body of the other brother, but it doesn't really make it clear that that's how it was going.
Mhm.
So I decided to make it a more patchwork design. I
And I love
mean,
that. I think it's so much better.
do you remember the Frankenstein movies from back then, wherein one foot was shorter than the
Mhm, mhm.
other,
Oh, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
then yeah, and then one eye was like kind of wonky, and
Mhm,
and I thought if a real Dr. Frankenstein existed,
mhm.
I mean, he would probably not be gross. He will try to really mend other parts from other bodies. I mean,
Right,
it won't be strange for him to do something like that. And
right.
I thought Herbert West was like a modern day
Mhm,
Frankenstein in a way.
mhm.
And I think it's way more creepier this way, to be
Yes.
honest.
I
If
th
you seeing the stitches
Mhm.
across the face and the neck in the body.
Right. The one
Yeah,
going
yeah,
acro the
and
going across the nose is the one that gets me.
maybe one of the noses wasn't working well.
Right, exactly, maybe, when one of them fell, broke their nose, and so that nose wasn't usable. So, he took this nose and took that part of him.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because you have to remember that one of the brothers got really fucked up real bad.
right, right,
And I mean, he had to, like, maybe some parts of the body was rotting more than the other parts of the body. And like you said, he was taking good parts of the body and putting them together,
right.
which makes the experiment a bit more insane, if you can believe that.
Yeah, it's completely insane. Yeah, there's nothing sane about this, but part of the Lovecraftian story was that he was having a hard time getting the bodies, and so in my mind, it's like, okay, he's sort of at this dilemma where he's like, fresh bodies, they're not all complete, but I have two of them. So maybe I can get one out of them. And so, like
Mhm.
in Herbert West's mind, it's like, okay, yeah, let's do this.
Yeah, maybe part of the what was it? 47
Hmm.
experiments.
Hmm. Hmm.
Maybe most of them consisted of one body, and
Right,
then he realized that it wasn't working because some of the body parts were more rotted than the rest.
right,
And maybe through trial and error, he came up with this solution.
right. A good scientist, you try a lot of different things.
Yep, scientific methods.
Yeah. All right. So our reanimated comes back to life. The heart rate is going way too fast. There's no cognitive abilities here. He's trying to keep the the reanimated from thrashing because the stitching isn't going to hold, to the point where actually his arm actually does fall off. Um, and so ultimately, after a certain amount of time, Herbert West that realized this is not going to work. And the same as experiments 30 through 32 through 46, where the bodily functions have resumed, but not the higher functions. And so, he applies euthanasia and promptly shoots the reanimated. Um, I love that one panel of him sitting there looking at his watch, noting the time as he's holding the gun and he's covered in blood. It's utterly ridiculous and it's just perfect. I think that's exactly who our Herbert West is.
Mhm.
Um so he hears the noise of them in the closet again and brings Trish out and decides, okay, if these two bodies were not fresh enough, maybe I need something even fresher, and I'm gonna try it with Trish. Take care of her. Maybe see her. Check out something with her brain as I do an experiment. And along comes Kerwin from the Miskatonic University Library, who's telling him to stop. Um, of course, we know very quickly through the lettering that this is Anton, um, posing as Kerwin, and Herbert West quickly sees through this, um, and proceeds to shoot Kerwin through the brain, but nothing's happening because the bullets go right through his head because it's Anton, who's a ghost. Um, I find this splash page of Herbert West shooting Anton really cool because of the angle you used, coming up from the bottom like that. And I was wondering if you could just talk for a minute about how you made the choice on this page.
Well, let me say that drawing all of these pages really helped me appreciate how complex the medical equipment are, because I had to draw
Yeah.
a lot of them
Oh, sorry.
over and over again. But you know what? Since we were going to use it for the next few issues, I kind
Mhm.
of got used to it, and
Right.
it's just muscle memory.
Right.
But the first few pages of this
Mhm.
consisted of a lot of research. I
Did it?
mean,
Okay, so like
what's the right equipment
uh-huh.
for the right thing,
Mhm.
and I didn't realize there were so many for respiration, for the
Mm,
heart, for the
yeah,
brain. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, and
mhm.
it's really interesting. I mean, it gave me a lot of appreciation for what doctors do right now. It's unbelievable how much equipment we have to rely on these days just to, you know, save people and reanimate dead people.
Right, in real life, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mhm,
So talking about the splash page, yeah,
mhm,
this was pretty cool image.
mhm.
And at first, I was worried about how I was going to fit the three of them. I
Right,
mean, the description called for Trish to be present in the in the page to
Right.
so that she
Mhm.
can react to what was happening.
Right.
So I was thinking of first doing it from a top-down view,
Mhm. Yeah, above.
and it wasn't really working. I
Mhm.
mean, you usually use top-down views when you're trying to show something important,
Mhm.
like if you're reading a book or rummaging through a bag, you
Right,
usually use that. Yeah,
looking
yeah.
over their shoulder, yeah.
But this one consisted of a action scene, so
Mhm.
it has to be a little more dynamic.
Mhm.
So I wanted it to have an angle and where just like in covers,
Mhm.
wherein the cameraman is like situated somewhere where he's safe
Right.
and reacting to the situation. So I wanted to see the reactions of all three characters
Mhm.
in one sweep and also show the whole background.
Mhm.
And it usually angles like this automatically makes the scene a lot more dynamic
Yeah.
compared to just putting it on the side
Yeah.
or like that. So
Well,
yeah, it
it's
really
kind of
helps.
it's like the cover where you had it down behind the hand. You know, when you have it more, like, down towards the floor looking up, it just like you said, it becomes a lot more dynamic.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it helps that you have a background in photography,
Mhm.
and it kind of helps you with compositions.
Mhm.
Just like when you're taking photos of kids and pets, you have
Mhm.
to really go down so
Mhm.
that you're eye level with them.
Mhm.
So for action scenes, you have to skew it a bit so that it kind of mimics movement in a way.
Mhm.
Because let's admit it, the comic books are really flat medium,
Mhm.
and so you have to find ways so that the composition will evoke action
Right.
in some way.
Right.
So yeah, it was pretty fun to come up with this image.
Well, it just, the way that we have this scientist with a gun shooting a ghost, and Trish, who's tied up on the table and unable to stop any of this. It's such an interesting scene and different personalities to put them all together in one page that I think it does a lot to sort of drive home exactly where they are, sort of the dynamic between all three of them, and sort of where where they're going, I guess.
Yeah,
So where they are going is that Anton reveals that he's a ghost, punches Herbert West. Trish takes the gun, and Trish, being the intellectual that she is, says, rather than it turns this into like an action piece or an action story, really turns this into here's a an intellectual problem. Let's come up with the intellectual solution. Um, So she a little bit, we gloss over some of the conversation, but basically tells Herbert West about Anton's situation. Um, and Herbert West is very interested in Anton because one of the things that you note from the Lovecraft story, the original Lovecraft story, is that Herbert West doesn't believe in the soul. He basically believes that humans are an animal, and if you can reanimate the brain, you can reanimate a person. And one of the cool things about our comic is Anton is a soul, essentially. I mean, he's a ghost of some sort. Whatever what he actually is, I don't think we've ever really explained. Just that there are these ghosts that are around there who are sort of reliving their lives, and there's some ghosts who are not, and he happens to be one of them. Um, and so, Trish would of course have the idea. Okay, well, if the ghost isn't going into the body that you're reanimating, maybe the next experiment should be that you should try putting a ghost into a body, and we happen to have a ghost right here. We just need to get him a body. And Herbert West, as a scientist, would say, yes, let's do that. Let's try that. That's an experiment worthy of trying. Um, so Anton's all excited about it. Yeah, give me a body. What do you need? And um, of course, what you need is something that you can clone. You need some sort of DNA. And as we've explained over and over, Anton has never existed in this timeline. That his body disappeared when he was stabbed with the blade of Cronus. Um, and so he's walking down the street. He's all ticked off. Trish is going after him. Um, I'm bet you're glad to be out of Herbert West's office and medical laboratory. But it's cool, to suddenly go into the setting of the town at night and having him walk through there. Um, it's a nice sort of change of setting. And I was kind of curious, like, how you decided where he should be walking, because I think in the script I just said he's walking along a road somewhere, and I thought it was interesting that you put him right here in town. So I'm kind of curious, like, how you decided that.
Well, I think one of the things in the script was, um, yeah, you're right. He was just walking in
Yeah,
town and something like that.
yeah.
And I really didn't have anything particular in mind. I just wanted it to look like what what we always thought of Miskatonic would look
Mhm.
like.
Right.
And, just see that even in normal setting, you would never think of um, such dastardly things happening like
Mhm.
this. I
Right.
mean, you can see that people are just walking about their business without even knowing that monsters walk amongst them.
Well, I also think
Yeah,
it sort of highlights, sort of, for Anton, like, here are people just going about their normal daily lives, and he can't. He doesn't belong here anymore. And so it sort of highlights what he's lost.
yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of realizes that what's the point? I
Yeah.
mean, even if he gets his body back, it's not like his family would recognize him because he didn't just lose his body, but he also lost his whole being. He's
Right.
in another timeline, so to speak, or something like that, and
Mhm.
it's kind of messes him up pretty badly.
Right.
And once in a while, it kind of hits him hard,
Right.
and it's just lucky for him that Trish is there to kind of support him. It's
Mhm.
not like other other people who would just berate him or
Right.
just tell him to get over it.
Right. But I
And
also I
even
also
even though that happens, he still just kind of shrugs it off, like, yeah, whatever.
right. The thing that I like about Anton, and we've talked about this some, is that Anton can be a bit of an asshole. Like, he's just your normal teenager. It's like, Trish is trying to sort of talk him, sort of calm him down, sort of smooth things over, and try and make him feel better. And he's like, yeah, no, forget it. Which is exactly what a teenage boy would do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the things I like about it. We've seen him do that before with other characters, like when Alex gave him the gift and he just threw it away. It's like, that's who Anton is. He's a bit of an ass. He's not always nice to people. And I like that about him. I think that makes him more of a real person. Um, so he decides to go home, because that's, when people are ticked off, sometimes that's what they do. And so he goes to talk to the one person who does sort of know him, which is his little sister, um, who we had seen the parents were going to deliver a baby, and so they had a baby, had a little sister. Um, and so he goes, and she's like the only member of the family that he can talk to. And so he's talking to her, and he's just sort of talking to himself about how there's no body, there's no body he can go and dig up. really that there's nothing that's left of him from when he got stabbed, except for, there was a gush of blood. And that's when it sort of occurs to him that maybe there is some bit of him that's left over. And, this is something, that we talked about, God, a long time ago and have sort of been waiting to pull out. Um, and so we cut to another scene of Sarah playing video games with Jeff. This is something that we talked about before, that Sarah's sort of developing friendships with the hockey team, um, and sort of making friends and sort of actually becoming kind of popular in a way. Um, and so they're playing a video game and in Jeff's basement, and Chris, who's sort of the jerk of the hockey team, comes through, and sort of in some kind of relationship with Jeff's sister, in a way that Jeff does not like, but can't really do anything about. Um, I love this basement. Like this feels like a suburban basement where people go and play video games. So nice
I
job on
wouldn't know.
that. Well, it works. It really does. It's really the couch sells it for me.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that I can relate with.
Yeah, the old beat up couch,
Yeah,
believe
yeah,
me.
yeah.
So here's the life cycle in people's houses is the nice couch goes upstairs, and after the kids destroy the nice couch, it goes downstairs. And so then they get the new nice couch, and the new nice couch is upstairs, and the kids have to go downstairs to play video games. That's
The,
exactly how it goes.
the only thing I could base this on is TV shows.
Mhm.
Maybe the thing that really sticks to my head is that 70s show. Although I
Oh,
didn't
sure, yeah,
watch
yeah.
that,
Uh-huh,
I
yeah,
didn't watch that, but
uh-huh,
I kind of recall some scenes
mhm.
that had that kind of setup.
Yep,
And
mhm.
so immediately my mind went to that. And it
Well,
kind of works,
yes,
the angle of the stairs. It just kind of makes the room a
mhm,
bit more homey. Is
right.
that the right word?
Yeah, the paneling on the wall, sort of the darkness, you
Yeah,
sort of
yeah.
feel like you're in a bit of a basement. Yeah, the whole thing works for me. I really do. I like it.
Yeah, yeah. I think I wanted it to look a bit more grungy than
Mhm.
what we've seen with the houses of the other kids.
Right,
I mean, we've seen Sarah's place, and it's very different
right,
from this compared to like Alex's house or
right,
even Matt's or Simon's. So
right,
it helps to give it a different flavor for each of their places,
right,
and it kind of describes how they are as a person.
right,
Well, I mean, it kind of describes the background that they belong in,
right. Well, and
and it
and
makes it a bit more realistic in that way.
right. And I like it because it gives us, my thing is whenever you have a character, it's always nice to take them to their house because once you see them in their home, you really get more of a feeling for who they really are. And so you get the feeling that, Jeff is this suburban kid. He doesn't come from a rich family. They make him go downstairs in the basement and play video games. And that's exactly the kind of kid who, Sarah could be friends with. Like in a normal world, like she could just be friends with Jeff. But, like all the weird things that happen in Miskatonic and the things that people say about her family, it's like she didn't have a chance to make those friendships. And so
Mhm.
I like it a lot. I like seeing Jeff in his house. Um, so Chris goes upstairs, Jeff tells us a bit about the hockey team, which we didn't really know a whole lot about before, which is, that on a hockey team, there's a couple of different kinds of people. There are people who are into the sport of it. There's people who are into, just having fun on the ice or whatever. And then there are the kids, and having come from a place where people play hockey, there are the kids who go out to it because it's a way that they can beat up on people and not get in trouble for it. And in fact, people cheer them on when they do it. And Chris is exactly that kind of person. He would beat up people on hockey skates or not on hockey skates, but because he's on hockey skates, he gets away with it. Um, and Jeff is saying, that Chris is this way, and they all kind of want to stop him, but they can't. It's like they're all kind of afraid of him. And Sarah understands. I mean, she's afraid of people too. And so, she and Jeff are really kind of becoming friends here. While playing Mortal Kombat. So then Anton shows up. So Sarah goes out and has this conversation with him, and Anton asks her for the Blade of Cronus. Rewinding way back to issue 6, Sarah had the Blade of Cronus last, the time travel knife last, and she says that she threw it into the river as she and Barry were going to Innsmouth because she didn't want it to fall into anybody's hands and, anything like that. Anton has never believed it and certainly doesn't believe it now. She's a rat. She, as we've seen, rats hide things in holes, and most likely Sarah knows where it is and can find it for him. And so he just goes and full bore on her, asking her where it is, and really just sort of putting her in an awkward position that she doesn't like being in. He's calling her names. He's just basically being a jerk about it. And she's had enough. One of the nice things that you've been doing over the course of now 18 plus issues is really sort of seeing the way that Sarah just physically is changing, from being a very meek, quiet girl into this girl who's part rat thing. And you can start to see it more and more in her features, but also in the way that she gets upset at things. She's getting upset at more things, and she's able to voice it, and there's a physicality to it, that I really like. Is that I assume that's something you're doing consciously, that as you go, you're adapting her more and more?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when she gets angry at Anton in one of the panels,
Mhm,
that was a conscious decision on my part to show a bit more of her rat-like persona. I
mhm.
think we saw this in the annual.
Yeah, a lot
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
Yeah.
So if you guys haven't seen the annual, try to get it. It's a good story.
It is a good story. I like that one a lot.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, once in a while it kind of uh, pops up
Mhm,
visually
mhm,
for Sarah, and yeah, like you said, she's changing bit by bit,
mhm,
but I'm not sure if I'm doing it subconsciously
mhm,
or if it's just in the natural progression of the characters
mhm,
throughout the series.
mhm.
And if that's the case, then that's good because it
Yeah,
only means that we're not simply developing the characters' personalities, but also their physical
right,
nature.
right,
That this thing does not solely affect her mentally and emotionally, but
right,
it's also manifesting physically.
right.
So that's a good thing. It's like a it's like a reverse ugly duckling
Mhm,
in which the more she becomes a rat-like creature,
mhm.
the more her whole presence becomes stronger.
Right.
So I think for her personally, it's a subconscious thing. She doesn't
Mhm.
even realize it's
Yeah.
happening, and it's kind of scary in a way when she realizes it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
as we'll see, well, as we'll see more of. Um, but I don't think it's just her, and again, I don't know how conscious you are of this, but it certainly feels like something that I've noticed with characters. The one that occurs to me is Simon. Simon, when he started, he had a very, very prim and proper, and handled himself a certain way, and as he's developed and become more and more comfortable with the other members of the group and sort of become more friendly, like, he's become a little less stiff, a little less formal all the time, a less and I like the way that his physicality is developing in line with his personality as well. So it's not just Sarah. I mean, I think all of them to some extent are changing physically as well as, as their character changes.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
you said, Simon is a tricky character to to depict because he's the kind of character which you really can't. Yeah, it's pretty hard to challenge him because
Mhm.
he feels like he knows everything
Mhm.
and he knows he can. So
Yeah.
he has to be placed in a very different situation, very uncomfortable situation for
Mhm.
him to even rethink his position.
Mhm.
And I think he's been placed in that position for very for a lot of times throughout
Mhm.
the series that he kind of has to rely on the other characters.
Yeah.
And in a way, that kind of changes him because it forces him to go outside of his comfort zone.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it kind of mellowed him down a bit, but
Mhm.
he still has his Simonness
Of
about
course.
him.
We all love that Simonness.
Hmm.
So, Anton, is looking for the blade. Sarah, one of the things he does is after, a while, he's like, "If you're supposed to be my friend, why aren't you helping me out?" And she's like, "You call me names. You're not my friend, Anton. If you were alive, you'd have nothing to do with me." Which is absolutely right. When Anton was alive, he wanted nothing to do with any of these kids, Um, it's very transactional. She knows that he just wants the blade, and then he's gonna be gone. He's not gonna want have anything more to do with her. And, it sort of forces Anton to confront, kind of who he is, which is, when I was alive, I didn't need anyone, when he was alive, he didn't have much of a community anyway. We saw that he was a bit of a bully towards Simon. We know that he sort of went, sort of operated on his own, was kind of like a lone wolf kind of guy, and really didn't have anybody. So when he got stabbed and sort of lost his persona in this timeline, it's kind of emblematic of who he was before because he didn't really have a lot of connection anyway. Um, and he's sort of coming to that conclusion himself, sort of Sarah's sort of forcing him to him, but also a lot of what's been happening to him throughout the series has sort of been leading him to this. And he's like, yeah, you guys, Trish and Ren and Alex and you and hell, even Matt, you're better friends than I had when I was alive, and it's kind of a, a thing for him to realize that he needs people. Um, and so Sarah kind of realizes that maybe he's becoming someone that she wants to help out. Um, And so she does. She goes with him to the last place where the blade was, which was in the courtyard of Miskatonic High, way back in issue 6, when they were fighting the Golgoroth and all of that was happening right here. And she digs a hole and brings out the blade and hands it to Anton. Um I thought it was cool to, like, revisit this place and, you know, the 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 thing that always gets me is, seeing that statue of the Warlock. Um, that will always take me back to issue 6 because of how we originally planned to end issue 6, which was to have the Golgoroth be stabbed on the statue before we
Hmm. I
decided.
remember that.
Yeah, I remember. Um so, I always like going back there. I I don't know about you, but I really wanted sort of the handing over of the blade to be like a monumental moment because like the blade was so important through like the first 6 issues. It really kicked off our series for us, and it sort of ended that arc. And then
Yeah.
also it was important in the crossover with Lovecraft PI, and to have it finally come back into the series. So I really like that you gave that moment, an extra oomph.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it was pretty important to highlight the blade since we haven't seen it in such a long time. And like you said, we kind of have everyone convinced that it was gone.
Hmm.
I mean, I remember you saying that we can't rely on the blade too
Right,
much. I mean, it will just mess up the series because it can just go back
right,
in any moment of the of history and change things here and there, just like other time traveling stories, and we
right,
just couldn't do that. So we had to find a way that uh, takes takes it out of the picture,
right.
so to say. So I think it was a great idea to have Sarah hide it and convince everyone
Hmm.
that she threw it away. It
Hmm.
kind of also dictates of how sneaky she is in real life. I mean,
Right.
she can be manipulative if she wants to.
Yes, you
I
can.
mean, she does it for the good of it. But
Right.
you
She comes from
know,
a good place.
yeah, yeah. But she's not like Alex or Simon, who's more blatant with their plans.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, she has her way. She has her own way.
Right.
And I think we've seen it throughout the series that she's forced to do these things because of how hard of a life she's had.
Yeah.
So it's very important for her character to make decisions
Mhm.
based on what she thinks is good for her. And I think it's also because of her ever increasing animalistic instincts. I
Mhm.
mean, digging a hole and hiding something in it is pretty much
Yeah.
animal like if you
Right.
think about it, right?
Right. Right. I have a bunch of squirrels. They dig my yard the whole time burying acorns, so,
We have squirrels here too. I
yeah.
mean, I thought it was only in the US, but I don't know how they got here.
Squirrels are everywhere. Squirrels are like cockroaches. Those are gonna be the 2 things that survived the nuclear holocaust. It's gonna be squirrels and cockroaches.
That's the next series.
Well, I think if you remember issue 2, when Ren and saw the rat handprint, she's she's like, "I think they're squirrels," and then
Yeah, 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 I
Martin's like,
remember that.
"Prehistoric squirrels," and so, yeah, squirrels. Um, yeah, so like you said, the Blade, like a lot of time travel stuff, the one that occurs to me is Bill and Ted towards the end when they're constantly saying, "Okay, I need to go back in time and leave the keys right here." And if you have time travel, it can fix everything. So that's sort of
Mhm.
why the dialogue at the start of that page talks about how she had had a conversation with Alex, and she, she knew she had access to the blade and probably asked Alex in a hypothetical way, if I had the means to time travel back, could I stop myself from becoming a rat thing? Is there a way that I could do that? And she said no, because, for Alex, she's read every time travel story, seen every time travel movie possible, and know that, if you go back and change time, you're no longer the person who would go back in time to change it. And so basically just setting the ground rule for our series that no, you cannot go back and change time so that you would not then go back to do it. So Sarah can't go back and stop her parents from having her be born, can't go back and stop her whole family from becoming rat things, can't stop any of it because if you do, she won't be the person who would then go back and do it. So we set that ground rule up. And so what she's telling to Anton is you can't stop yourself from becoming a ghost. You're a ghost now. If you tried to go back, you can't change it. Um, and Anton of course is saying, I don't need the blade to go back in time. I just need it to see if there's my DNA on it.
Yeah, that was a that was a pretty good twist to the story, and
Yeah.
he needed the blade for something else.
Hmm.
It's typical Anton.
Yeah, yeah, but also
Hey,
I
can I
you know
ask you out? Hey, that's so sweet. Yeah, I need you to act. I need you to get something for me.
Yeah, that does sound like Anton. Yeah. But also, really this came from, if you remember like that first issue where Anton got stabbed, really, why blood was spurting everywhere when there was no body made absolutely no sense. It's like it sounded cool, it looked cool, let's do it. And then had no idea that it would mean anything, but I've had that sort of stuck in my head for all this time. It's like, why was blood spurting out if there's no body? And so, starting to put it together with the blade and how, Anton would need a body and sort of Herbert West and putting all the ideas together. It's like, yeah, okay, let's explain why blood was spurting out and there was no body. So,
Yeah, and the blood
mhm,
was pretty useful for this issue too.
right.
And that when he needed the DNA, I mean, his reaction in the in the scene where he was with his sister was priceless. I mean,
Hmm.
when he realized my blood.
Right.
I mean, he's talking about his sister, but he's
Mhm.
also talking about his blood.
Right. Right. For when I was trying to come up with the storyline for this, like when you're trying to craft the story, you got to put yourself in the character's point of view, and it's like, okay, Anton is trying to figure out the solution to this mystery, and the mystery is how is he going to become a body again? And so you go through it like, okay, if it was me, my first thought would be, okay, what about my parents' blood? Well, that's no good. What about a sibling? Because a sibling shares the closest match of a DNA that you're going to be able to find. But of course, it's not a complete match. But it's a nice progression of how his mind would work and gave us a way of following his mind so that like we see him actually go and see his sister. So again, not just telling, but also showing, and then having him in that conversation with his sister coming to the conclusion about, oh, my blood.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
yeah,
it's pretty clever actually.
right. Well, it's like we talk about, a lot of our stories are really mystery stories when you get down to them, and it's that same sort of pattern of writing a mystery story, following the clues. It's just in this case, it's him trying to come to the conclusion.
Hmm.
Yeah. So he takes the blade to Herbert West. Herbert finds the DNA that he's looking for. Um, finds, there's just this little note about how the different parts of his genetic material, that he's descendant of West African, of Native American, of Irish, and something unidentifiable. Um, and so he asked Herbert West if he can make him a body, and Herbert West says sure. Um, Herbert West keeps referring to himself as we, like the royal we. And Anton asks him, why do you keep saying we when you mean I? And Herbert West says, what are you talking about? We don't do that. And Anton's like, never mind. Um, behind them, we notice that there's now only 3 things of serum, when before we saw 4 things of serum. So someone who will sharp-sighted readers will notice that. And then we are back in the graveyard where we are at a little shack and we find that lost batch of serum, which Trish has taken. She is having a FaceTime with her grandfather in India, who is telling him that Simon's flight was delayed in the Philippines and hasn't made it yet because, that was back in issue 14. Um, Meanwhile, Trish is not calling about that. Trish wants to know about the third eye. If you recall in issue 12, she had asked Ren about the third eye because had noticed that Ren is capable of using the bindi, which is what the Hindu refer to the third eye as. Um,
Mhm.
and so she's been curious about it because there's a number of beliefs about it, but also her grandfather has done some research on it. And so now she wants to know about that research because Trish, much like Herbert West, is doing her own experiment. She has dug up a skeleton of her mother and is applying the reanimation formula to the skeleton. Um, as we end this issue, we notice that there's a certain thing with scars outside the window that is looming over Trish, looming over the body, and sort of looming over this whole story arc since we started it way back in issue 14. And
Mhm.
that's where we end the story. I this is one of those stories that all the pieces were working so well together. Trish finally learning about her, Anton, the Blade of Cronus coming back, the introduction of Herbert West, seeing the reanimated thing, really sort of positioning this story for where it's driving towards. And I think it worked out so well. It's a really nice issue that I think works really well and looks really great.
Yeah, yeah, I have to agree with that. It's one of the better issues that we've come up with.
Hmm.
And like you said, it's where the writing and the art was meshing really well.
Yeah.
And it's headed towards a very cool conclusion. So, yeah, I
Right.
can't wait for the readers to get to that point. But this was a great setup. I mean, the first few pages really set the tone for it,
Hmm.
and I think the rest of the issue nailed it.
Hmm.
And I think it's a great way to introduce the other Lovecraftian aspects of the story to our Miskatonic world. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
great issue.
Yeah, I agree. It worked out so well, bringing those Lovecraftian elements. Nice that we finally got Herbert West in and the reanimation and that whole thing, because it's such a fun world to play in. So
Mm-hmm.
no, I think it's great. I think you did a great job. I'm really happy with this one. All right.
That
That
it?
Yeah, that pretty much covers it for 18. The people who are listening to this, we are going to be launching 19, which has to do with Simon landing in India, talking to his grandfather. And that's that's another fun one. More time travel fun, more weird stuff happening, and I think you'll like it. So that one is launching. If you're watching it the weekend when we drop this commentary, it's coming on Tuesday.
Cool.
So look for it.
Can't wait.
Yeah, me neither. All right, so that's it. Thank you, Ryan. Have a happy Father's Day.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy Father's Day.
Happy Father's Day. All right, talk to you later, everybody.
Bye.